Dwayne J. Clark and Walk This Way. We've got a great show for you today. I'm honored and proud to have a friend and CEO of Mod Pizza, Scott Svenson. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Dwayne.
Yeah.
Great to see you.
You know, I'm always embarrassed to share the camera with you because you're so good looking and you're so educated and you're so successful that I'm delighted that you're even here.
Flattery will get you everywhere.
I know. And you're so damn busy, so that's one of the problems. But, you know, Scott, I've known for a long time. We were in YPO together and in Forum together and have the utmost respect for you. And, you know, Scott is like the American dream. I mean, he went to Harvard. He was a Harvard quarterback. He married a beautiful cheerleader. I mean, God, this is like a painted story of your life. So,
thanks.
But let's start early on. Talk about how you grew up, where you grew up, what your parents did.
Yep.
So
I grew up, and thanks for having me, Dwayne. This is
bet.
great. Most importantly, it's just fun to hang out with you.
You too.
So I grew up not far from here. I grew up in Clyde Hill, a suburb of Seattle, and kind of a very normal American upbringing.
Right.
Played a lot of sports, got in trouble, did
Yeah.
my best to get through school. But you know, it was a childhood where on the outside it looked kind of very Norman Rockwell. I think,
Right.
like with most people, the actual story was a little more dramatic.
Right.
And just a little bit of insight. You know, my father was an aspiring entrepreneur and had been in a salary job and decided to buy a company right at the time when interest rates spiked to 22%.
So was it early 80s or?
It was the early 80s, and so his whole experience as a business owner was one of trying to keep the business alive. And,
Right.
And so growing up, the backdrop was this uncertainty as to whether or not my dad's business was going to be around.
So were there financial problems? I mean,
There was always financial stress.
right.
And listen, against the backdrop of 98% of Americans,
Right.
it's hard to say that it was a tough upbringing because I lived in a great community.
Right.
Like I said, it was Norman Rockwell.
Right.
But the reality of living through it was there was always a stress that, you know, maybe the next month or the next quarter things wouldn't still be the same. And my father, as a result, was a great man and somebody I cared a lot for and did a lot for me. Coached my sporting teams, but he had a lifelong challenge with addiction, and so that was the other kind of dynamic.
Alcohol addiction?
Alcohol and prescription drugs.
Wow.
So that was kind of the backstory, which I think a lot of people have, which is the story you think you see versus the story that actually exists.
Right.
And
yeah.
so I feel very fortunate to have had the upbringing and parents and childhood that I did. But
And siblings? Did you have?
I have 3 siblings. I have an older sister and a younger sister and a younger brother.
So you're number 2.
I'm number 2. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you went to school. You were the quarterback of the high school football team.
Yep.
You went on to go to college in Harvard, so you must have had good grades and good academics.
Yeah, you know, again, I joke that I would have never gotten into Harvard today.
Yeah.
The competition for spots in those elite schools is so much more crazy than it was then. But I was fortunate in that I did play football, and again, that's something I would put to my dad. He encouraged me through my upbringing with sports. Initially, I thought, you know, like a lot of kids in this area, that I'll grow up and I'll go to the University of Washington.
Right.
And it was my dad who really challenged me and encouraged me to spread my wings a little bit. And back then, recruiting for sports and so it was just a different age.
Right.
And my dad went through the process of putting these VHS tapes together of highlights and sending them out to a bunch of schools. And so I was recruited. Again, I probably wouldn't have been recruited in today's day and age, but I was recruited back then to a bunch of schools. And as a result of my football, I think that's what allowed me to get into a place like
So you were
Harvard.
recruited from an athlete standpoint?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I was a good student.
Right.
But there are a lot of good students.
Yeah.
I think it was because I had football that it allowed me to get into school.
Now, did you know you wanted to go into business because of your dad's entrepreneurial spirit, or was that a turn off? Or
you know, it's interesting. I have 4 boys,
right.
and it's the joy of our life. Allie and me. Allie and I've been together since we were in high school.
Right.
And their sophistication and thinking around their journey in life is so much more developed than mine was back then. I thought kind of 6, 12 months ahead.
Right.
So I didn't really know what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I joke about it. I'm still on a journey of trying to figure out what I want to do with my life.
Well, you've done a pretty good job so far. We'll get into that.
But so it was, I didn't know if I wanted to get into business. I thought I did. And so what I ended up doing is going to college, and then immediately after school, I had a liberal arts undergrad education. Great education, but I didn't know anything about business.
Right.
I couldn't tell you a balance sheet from a P&L statement. I didn't know. I got a job on Wall Street, and I took the job because it was an opportunity to get educated. It was like getting an MBA and getting paid for it. And I graduated with a bunch of student loans, so I needed to take care of myself.
What was the job on Wall Street?
I worked for a company called Drexel Burnham Lambert.
Okay, yeah.
And I worked in corporate finance, and I was just one of those kids.
So they hired you with a liberal arts degree to work in corporate finance.
And I think they still do that. They kind of mix their class with kids that had the traditional finance track, and then those who have a more, at the end of the day, being successful in business, you need to be able to think, you need to be able to communicate, you need to be able to convince and persuade people. And liberal arts education is a great background for that. Now, I needed to come in and figure out all the other stuff. And I'll never forget sitting in my first week. They put you through a month-long training program.
Okay.
And in the first week, I was sitting in this class, and there were, I think, 20 of us. And 18 of them had been either finance or accounting majors, and I literally embarrassed myself because the second day of the class, I had to raise my hand and said, so you're talking about the balance sheet, and you're talking about this concept of equity. Can you just pause on that and explain what you mean? And everyone looked at me like I was from Mars. But I literally didn't know. Yeah. And so my learning curve was super
you've
steep.
kind of learned that since then, though.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of got thrown in, and it's been a life of learning.
So how long did you work for Drexel?
I was there, it was a 2-year program. I was there for just over a year. 18 months, when they asked me if I wanted to take on an opportunity to move to London. And I'd never been abroad. And so for me, it was a year-long adventure. I said yes. They gave me an opportunity to kind of bypass. Typically, you are an analyst for 2 years, you go to business school, and you come back as an associate if you want to stay in investment banking. They said, how about we promote you to associate, and we'll send you to London. And I was like, I'm in. And so
now, were you married at this time?
Nope. Allie was... she was a year behind me.
Okay.
I had gone to school in Boston, gone to work in New York. She was going to school in Boston. She went to Wellesley. A year behind me, and she ended up going back to Seattle. She was, her dream initially when she was young was to be an on-air television personality, a news personality.
Right.
And so people like Gene Anderson and Barbara Walters and were kind of her. And she was given an opportunity. She was really good at it. To come back to King 5, they hired 2 people every year as kind of entry level, and they're generally graduates of journalism school.
Right.
And they took a risk on Allie, and she came in and she worked was mentored by Gene Anderson.
Wow, I didn't know that. Yeah.
And she was killing it. And in part of that mentorship, Gene said to her, you have to really think about whether or not you want to do this. I get to work at between 11 a.m. and noon, and I leave at midnight every day.
Wow. And
I'm on my second or third marriage. Are you sure you want to do this? At which point Allie said, no, I'm going to do something else, and maybe I'll come back to it when I can do it on my terms.
Yeah.
So in any event, I convinced her to move to London after I'd been over there for a year.
Wow.
And the year-long adventure turned into an 11-year adventure.
Yeah. But that's when you started the Seattle Coffee Company, right?
Yeah, so I went over there with Drexel. That only lasted about 6 months because Drexel got in trouble. And the small team I was with, ended up leaving to go to a company called Apex Partners, a venture capital firm. They invited me to go with them. I was there for 3 years. I'd always wanted to get on the other side of the table from being an advisor/investor to being an operator. And one of the companies we worked with was in the long-term healthcare space. I'd helped them restructure their balance sheet, put a strategy in place, raise a bunch of money. And at the end of that, the board came to me and said, you've helped us will you come and help us now execute it? Yeah. And I didn't have a passion necessarily around long-term healthcare, and I know this is an industry you've helped create in this country.
Well, thank you.
But it was an opportunity to get into an operator seat. So I went in as deputy chief executive of this public company that was in long-term healthcare.
You're like 25?
I was 28, I think.
Okay.
No, I was like 26 or 27. because I was there for 3 years, and you'll appreciate this. It was a elderly care business initially. We shifted. There was a company. This is a conversation you're going to have another time. That I had advised in the U.S. that had basically increased the acuity of their service and really had changed their whole business model. And so we adopted that strategy. Bought a brain injury rehab business. Really got heavy into dementia care. Really kind of changed the whole profile of the business.
So vertically integrated everything then.
Yeah, and so we were, I think we ran, by the time I left, 4,000 beds across the 4,000 or 5,000 beds, which was the third largest in the UK at the time.
Did you ever think, as a 26, 27-year-old kid, I don't know if I'm qualified to make these decisions.
Yeah.
This seems like a lot of brain power for a guy with my experience. Did you ever have those kind of doubts?
Yeah, I've always been pretty diligent, a little bit of a grinder in some ways.
Yeah.
And so I think I brought, in this particular case, what they were looking for is I advised this U.S. company, and I'd really gone to school on their strategy.
Sure.
No one in the UK had done it.
Right.
So then this other company, it was called Crestacare, came and asked me to advise them through this. And I brought this strategy and said, this is something you should consider. Mm-hmm. They loved it. They embraced it. And then it was, you're right. And I think still feels true today. You're just pedaling as hard as you can, not to let people down, and not to be found out that you really don't know what you know.
But I know you will work harder than anyone to find the answer. So
yeah, I do think, listen, at the end of the day, we're all given certain gifts, but none of them are worth much unless you work hard to apply them. And I think at the end of the day, if you're not willing to work hard, and so I have, and it's interesting. I'd say that right back to my my training in investment banking is one of the things that I really appreciated. You get thrown into this class, everybody is working at 80 to 100 to 120 hours a week. Everyone. So you just go along.
That's
and
just
think
the new normal.
That's what you do.
Yeah.
And I think it set a bar for me that I understood what hard work felt like. I was camaraderie. I was with 20 other people. They're all doing the same thing. So I'm like, I can hang out with these guys and do this. But for my rest of my career, everything felt easier because if you're not working 100 hours a week, it's like, I have more in the tank if I need to because I know what that feels like.
That was your paradigm, 120 hours a week. So 80 felt like you're on vacation.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is not. I think as I've matured, I've gotten to the point where I realize that's actually a little bit of an affliction.
Yeah, you don't want to teach your kids those values, right?
Well, it's not just a matter of how many hours, it's the quality of the hours.
Right.
And it's something I've worked really hard on recently. I'll tell you, I'm still evolving.
Well, I know, and you and I have had long conversations about that. So yeah,
and I've looked to you as an example of somebody who's created a life that's a little bit more multidimensional, a little deeper, and that's not just filled with long hours at the office.
I did an interesting exercise just because, as you know, I was in Europe for 40 days. Yeah. And so, turning 60,
I hear those words and I get so envious, by the way.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, I want you to have those times.
Someday.
But, turning 60, you start to think theoretically and the clock's ticking and all these things. So I sat down and I divided into a variety of categories exactly how much time I want to spend doing what. And it was an interesting exercise for me. I said, okay, there's 168 hours in the week. I sleep approximately 52. That leaves me, whatever the balance is.
How much do you sleep every night?
About 7:15, 7:20. Okay. How about you?
It's interesting. I've really started to think a lot about this, and I'm shooting for 8.
Yeah.
I just listened to a fascinating podcast about a week ago with one of the foremost sleep experts in the world, who basically said that if you statistically look at the number of people who can work optimally with less than 8 hours of sleep, and you round it to it's exactly 0%.
Really? Yeah.
Now there are some people, there's a gene, a defect, that
Yeah.
allows them to get by with 6.5 or 7.
Yeah, but that's like 3% of the population.
No. It's dramatically less than 1%.
Yeah.
And it's like a gene defect.
Right. So people can get by on 5 hours sleep.
And he went through and you'll appreciate this because you're into performance, and he talked about the impact of sleep deprivation, and he used the analogy of basketball players. And they did a study, and again, it's a fascinating podcast, that the impact of an NBA basketball player who got 8 hours or more versus 8 hours or less, the stats on things like Fouls, 40% more fouls.
Yeah.
25% fewer free throws. I mean, just kind of down through. The performance delta was huge. And in particular, anything that requires cognitive connection with performance is even more significant.
The creativity factor goes up, multiple times. And, my book that's coming out, 30 Summers More, there's like 8 or 9 things that you have to do. They're hallmarks of good longevity, and sleep is foundational. It's number one.
Yeah, well, they said, and you'll appreciate this, that if all the things, people are so focused on health and wellness.
Right.
And this, they were talking about it, and they said it's not a category of it.
Yeah.
It is the foundation of it.
Exactly. And it's not only the number of hours you get, but it's the REM and deep sleep, because that's what's restorative.
Right. Which, by the way, they went on to then talk about the impact of caffeine and alcohol.
Right.
You can get 8 hours of sleep having had 3 glasses of wine. You just won't get the restorative sleep.
You won't get restorative
because
sleep.
it impacts the REM portion of your sleep.
Exactly.
So there are a lot of other factors.
Yeah, and
I'm fascinated by this, because I'll tell you, I feel different.
Yeah.
I feel more clear. I feel more on it. I just feel when I'm well rested.
I'm sure you do track your sleep every night and so on, but
I don't, but I think I probably should start.
So I have this ring that's an Aura ring.
Okay.
And this will track restorative sleep, deep sleep, REM sleep, and so on. And I'll find my average is probably 718, 720, I think is what I average. But if I get 2 hours of deep sleep and only 7 hours of sleep, that's better than getting 8 hours sleep with 1 hour of deep sleep.
Yeah.
So in deep sleep, most people don't realize, they think, well, that's just the building of new cells. But the other thing that happens is your body's a factory that needs 7 hours to complete the factory cycle to purge the dead cells that your body's trying to get rid of.
Really?
And those dead cells are what creates cancer. It's what gives you Alzheimer's, because they clump together.
They talked in this podcast about the connection between sleep and health.
Yeah.
And exactly as you're saying, the incidence of various different diseases, cardiac and cancers and so forth, goes up with people who are sleep deprived. And they also went on to a connection which has not been, he was careful to comment, it's not been validated yet, but they're very confident of the connection between a lack of sleep and Alzheimer's.
Yeah, and it's because you're getting those amalgam plaques that are clumping together, that if you're not sleeping enough, your body's not getting rid of them. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're looking at sleep, because I care about you and I want you to live a long, long time. So talk about how then you jumped on the entrepreneurial train and you formed in London the Seattle Coffee Company.
Yeah, so it's interesting. My wife and I, Allie, my better half and partner, the day she arrived, she started to identify the things that the English were missing, that they really needed. Mm-hmm. And right at the top of the list was a quality coffee experience. There was nothing like Starbucks there at the time.
Was it because of Starbucks that influenced you? Or?
Yeah, I mean, we grew up in Seattle. So we grew up around a West Coast style, Starbucks style coffee experience. And in the UK, it was just dramatically different. And first day that she was there, she walked me to work. We walked through Hyde Park, and we were heading to my office. She was going to drop me off, and she said, well, let's stop by and get a cup of coffee. And I'm like, oh, honey, it's very different.
Right.
And so this started a 4-year conversation around the fact that there was a need that someone should fill. We went to the extent of calling Starbucks and saying, hey, we're just interested consumers. Can we help you set yourself up here so that we can... And long story short, some good friends of ours said, listen, you've been talking about this for 4 years. You should either stop talking about it or you should do something about it. And so with their encouragement, we kicked off this project of saying, let's see if we can do it ourselves. And
did you bootstrap it, or did you get other capital? Or?
We brought a couple of people around us, so people that we'd work with, people who had known us. And it's interesting, I'll kind of share. I'm surprised we could actually get this done. So we decided to launch this business. I retired or resigned from this long-term healthcare company. A funny story about that, the chairman, who was a very well-known industrialist in the UK, who had become chairman, we had bought a company in Scotland. He had been a big investor in that company. He became our chairman. We were a public company. When I told him that I was leaving to go start this coffee company, he thought that I had been working too hard and was having a nervous breakdown.
He thought you were crazy.
He thought I was crazy because he's in the UK coffee shop. He's like, he was very traditional, very conservative. He's like, you have a great career. You can't quit to go start a.
Yeah.
So
we drink tea here, man. Come on,
right.
What's the deal?
And coffee shops had a different connotation then. So we brought this group of people together who we'd work with, who were friendly with, and who could help us. We raised £100,000.
That was it.
That was it. And that allowed us to open our first store, to develop the brand and concept, and launch the first store.
And this is in 97, 98?
No, this was in 1995.
Okay.
And it was a total bootstrap.
And what was the concept? I mean, were you trying to mimic Starbucks?
It was a Starbucks-style coffee experience that we put very much our own fingerprint on. It was called Seattle Coffee Company. But it was inspired by Starbucks, totally direct. They were the ones that had, both in terms of the product and customer experience, but also just the ethos and energy. We looked at them and said, you guys should be here. And they said, well, we've just expanded to Asia, into Japan. We're not coming to Europe anytime soon. So we somewhat reluctantly said, okay, we'll do it. And we opened one and pretty quickly realized it was working. So we opened 2 more 6 months later. We came together as a team and said, wow, this is really working. The team looked at me and said, and Allie had been doing most of the work. I was working evenings, weekends. I mean, it was some crazy stories.
But
from
did
that
you
time.
Did you leave your company?
So during the development of those first 3, I was still working full time at the healthcare company.
You were.
But I literally would get up at 5 in the morning with Allie. I would drive her to the store. She would work in the store. I'd come home and help her close. I mean, it was crazy. There was a moment there where you jump into a business like this, and all of a sudden,
and you're newly married beyond.
And
this.
it was newly married. Well, we'd been married for a few years at that point, but we're living in the UK on our own. And there's a moment when you start a new business where you think, is this a business opportunity or is this a trap?
Right.
And there was a moment there where we thought this is a trap. But then we started to build our way out of it. We had 3. I then decided to resign from the healthcare company to commit myself to it full time.
Right.
I did so. Allie handed me the baton of kind of running it full time. 3 weeks later, she gave birth to our first son, Tristan. 2 days after she gave birth, we opened our 4th store. And over the next 22 months, we went from 4 stores to 75. And we closed the sale to Starbucks. So there was a 2-year period.
So you're doing one a week almost.
Yeah, it was. We ended up opening 65 or so in the UK, and then we had partners in Southeast Asia, South Africa, and the Middle East, where we'd open stores.
And was your goal always to flip it?
No, I mean, to be honest with you, this was our first rodeo, and so we didn't really know.
Right.
We were going to build a business.
Uh-huh.
We hadn't thought every move out. But what we did have is, there was that great Andy Grove book, Only the Paranoid Survive. We were paranoid.
Yeah.
We respected Starbucks so much that we thought as soon as they come to the UK, they're going to wipe the floor with us.
Yeah.
So we felt like we had no choice but to get out fast, build as many stores as we could to establish some base that we could defend.
So in 3 years, you had 65 stores.
75. 65 in the UK.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was the revenues of that?
Oh goodness. On an annualized basis, probably each store was just under £1 million a year in revenue. So
you were doing 70 million or something.
yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Maybe 60, 65, because the 10 stores internationally were licensed, so they were.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how many staff did you have then? Was it like 20 a store or something?
Yeah. So it would probably be. This will be a guess, but we probably had on the full Seattle Coffee Company team, probably 1,500 people, 1,200.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I mean, you were really young entrepreneurs to have that size of.
I know.
company.
Sorry. Let me. It's probably 1,000, or maybe just under 1,000.
But I mean, and you're still in your 20s. You got 1,000 employees.
Yeah. So when we sold to Starbucks, I think I was 32 or 33.
And when you were growing the company, did you keep getting more capital, or were the stores feeding themselves?
It's a great story. We were super scrappy.
Yeah.
We built that business raising £4.5 million of capital.
Right.
And interestingly enough, the last $2.5 million we raised about 7-8 months before the deal with Starbucks closed, and we hadn't even invested all of it. So we'd raised more capital than we really needed. We had a little bit of debt.
And were these venture people that you were raising?
No, it was all high net worth, value add individuals.
Wow, so
it's like really fabulous people who specifically could help us. And that's, I think, a lesson to any entrepreneur. In this particular case, we were looking around saying, we need help.
Right.
And so if you're going to bring capital, we'd really love it if you could help us. And so we had the guy who ran the Virgin Group was my chairman.
Wow.
A wonderful guy. Sad story, which is maybe a story for another time. He ended up committing suicide.
Wow.
But he was just an amazing individual. Similarly, we had a number of people like that around us who were there to support us. As a matter of fact, great story, there was a guy named Peter Ellis who had built out the equivalent of like Petco in the UK, the first big box dedicated, and he was a bit of a legend in the retail industry. And through some friends, Nigel Tay and Andrew Tay and Richard Tay, the family that we work very closely with, they introduced us to Peter Ellis. Peter became very fond of Ali and I, came in, joined the board, was an advisor during this phase. Before we opened the first store, we were like, hey, how do we think this is going to go? And he's like, Scott, now it's important you understand why I joined this board. I wanted to make sure that the process of failure was less painful for you, because there's no way this is going to work.
Really?
He basically said there's no way you're going to be able to sell enough cups of coffee to pay the rent, not to mention your team and everything else.
Yeah.
And this is a guy who's a retailer. The problem was he had never experienced the Starbucks. He just didn't get it.
Right.
How can you open a store to sell cups of coffee? And he thought of that, and he's like, this just doesn't compute.
Yeah, but one of the lessons there is, here's one of your most trusted advisors and get backers. They're telling you, you're going to fail. I'm just here to make sure you don't die from the failure.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
Now, what ended up happening is, as he started to see it come to life, what happened for him, his eyes opened, said, oh my gosh, I didn't fully understand what you were talking about.
Right.
Now I do.
Right.
Let's really grow this thing. So, his mind shift really changed.
Yeah. One of the things I've always admired you and Ali about is your ability to work together. And I think you know this, but T and I opened a spa. We were going to open a chain of spas. And we invested, I don't even remember how much it was, $1 million in building this world-class spa. And about a month in, we decided we're going to kill each other. I love you, honey. This is a great job, but we're going to kill each other. And probably my most horrible work experience of my life. I'm sure it was her most horrible experience. And we just, I was so used to being the boss, and she wasn't going to yield to that. And it was horrible. So I admire you and Ali. So what is the secret? I mean, how do you do it?
I think it's as simple as, one, we love each other, and our relationship is more important than anything, so we don't let the business get in the way of that.
Right.
But the reason why it works is that she has certain skills and innate talents that I just don't have.
Right.
And I think she views me the same way. So we're very complementary.
Where the lanes of each other are.
Yeah. And she has a sixth sense and an instinct around the consumer proposition and the branding and the positioning that I've learned from, and I think I'm pretty good at. I'm not as good as she is. And so, and we also partner in a way where, generally speaking, I'm in the weeds and I'm running the business and I'm investing 60, 70, 80 hours a week. And she is levitating a little bit higher, where she's maybe investing 20, 30, 40 hours a week. But she is intentionally not in the weeds so she can see it more clearly. And she looks at it more strategically and more from a brand, customer experience. And so the combination of those two things, she's not going to come in and say, hey, I think we should change the way we're financing the business. And she's going to look at me and say, I don't really care about that stuff.
So is she more the cultural champion of the company?
I'd say that she and I share that area. I'd certainly say that, at Maud, her title is Protector of the Purpose.
What a phenomenal title.
Yeah, and so she, we'll get into talking about Maud, but Maud is kind of a culmination of everything we've done, and kind of bringing all of our learnings together and saying, let's put this into a pot and see what we can make of it. And at the very core of it, the very essence of Maud is using a business as a platform to make a positive social impact, to improve the world around us.
Yeah.
And if it's done correctly, because it's a business, it'll be a perpetual motion machine. And how cool, even it'll outlive us. You have this entity that's making a positive impact in the world that can carry on forever.
Did you have those hallmarks and characteristics in Seattle Coffee Company?
So I'll tell you, we had some of them, but not. I'd say that if you think about a business as a, like a stool, we were very focused on building a successful business, and we were very focused on culture, how our team felt. But what we hadn't done is put that third leg in place, which is, why do we exist, and what impact are we making in the world? And we didn't, because we didn't think we could afford it. We felt like trying to take that on was too risky.
Yeah.
And listen, that was a stage in our life where we put all of our eggs in one basket. And if that basket broke, we were kind of out of luck.
Well, the world's changed though too. I mean, the whole social impact, social justice movement wasn't as strong 25 years ago as it is today.
No, that's true, but it wasn't even as strong 11 years ago when we started Mod.
Right.
But it became one of those things that it kind of revealed itself to us through our journey, that the moments when we were the most gratified, the most, what are we all seeking? We all want to feel content. We want to feel happy. We want to feel satisfied. We want to feel, whole and complete. The moments when we did were not when we cashed the check, but when the story that came out of the difference the business made in someone's life. And those were the things that had lasting positive impact on us. And we saw that over and over again. And so when we were starting Seattle Coffee Company, Mod, we said, how can we do that? And do it a lot, because it makes us feel so good. And so that's kind of how that came about. And so get back to your point, she has become the champion of that. She has really leaned into how is Mod making an impact and holding us accountable and making sure that in every conversation she brings that back to why are we here? And yes, we need to build a successful business, because if it's not successful, it's not sustainable. If it's not sustainable, then this is philanthropy. And it's not meant to be philanthropy.
Right.
It's meant to be the why behind our business, the reason why we exist. And if we can build a kick-ass business that makes, as a very nature of its existence, makes a positive social impact, this could be a model to change the world.
Yeah.
Because our ambition is to make a big impact. But our real ambition is to try to inspire other people to say, if you do this and you do this well, you will build a better business.
Yeah.
Because what's the most important thing in a business is your people. How you engage and inspire them to help you accomplish something great, something bigger than us.
Absolutely.
And how do you do that? Well, there's got to be a reason. You can't do it with a paycheck.
Yeah.
You can't do it with a rah-rah speech. They have to feel that they're investing their lives in something that matters.
I so believe that. I mean, that's been the essence of ages.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, first of all, you have to develop a like-minded tribe.
Yeah.
people that buy into this mission, and people will forfeit a lot of things to be part of that tribe. Compensation or whatever. But today I think more than ever before, people want to be part of something.
That's right.
And if you can link them together with the mission or the greater good, I mean, that's the second paycheck. That's when people feel like, hey, this is why I'm really at this job. Well, that's what's going to make people come to work on time and not miss a day and so on.
There's been a lot of research recently that particularly millennials will give up compensation to have that.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the numbers. It wasn't 2% coming. It was like 20%.
Yeah.
So it was they will give that up because they want to make sure their lives, their days are filled with meaning and purpose, and where they're like, what am I doing this for?
Yeah.
And that's a question Allie and I have asked a lot. Allie said at the very outset, if we're going to go build this business, the last thing the world needs is another soulless restaurant chain.
Yeah.
And she was really good. She's like, and I don't want to be a part of that. If that's what we're doing here, I'm going to do something else.
Yeah.
But if we can actually build a platform, okay, we sell pizza, which is awesome.
Right.
But if we can use this platform as a force for good, I'm all in.
I'm excited to talk to Mod. I want to close the loop on you sold Seattle Coffee Company to Starbucks. Did you go to them or did they come to you?
So we were growing fast, and growth, retail, consumer concepts in Europe at the time were in vogue. And so even though we were still small, there was a real attraction in the public markets for the brand. And we became pretty well known in the UK, so Seattle Coffee Company, there was an interest in taking us public. So we were on the path to going public, even though I look back now and think, gosh, we were really small. And as we were getting ready to go public, Starbucks approached us. And we had some mutual acquaintances, and we knew each other, and we ended up meeting the team. Started off, we had an amazing meeting with Orrin Smith, who's recently passed, but just an incredible guy. That was followed up with an even more intense meeting with Howard Behar, one of our favorite people in the world. Which then led to Howard Schultz coming over for 3 days, and we had this incredible 3 days with him, which led pretty quickly to us agreeing we're going to work with these guys. And it all came together pretty quickly.
And so you sold to them, and then you went to work for them, right?
Yeah, for 2 years.
Yeah. And so you were president of Europe?
Yep.
Yeah. And how was that for you?
So I'd say
you're going from being this entrepreneurial company to being part of this big machine.
Right. So I'd tell you that the first impression was, one, we had such respect and admiration for them, we were really excited to get in and learn.
Right.
And we felt like our business was this young upstart with all types of dysfunction and problems, because you're living in it. And we looked at Starbucks and thought, man, once we get in there, they've got this thing sorted out, they got it dialed in, we're going to learn so much. We got inside and we realized they were just a bigger version of us.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a reflection of life. I mean,
yeah.
No matter
it's
where.
a reflection of a growing company.
Exactly. And so that was the first, which was, okay, they just have the same problems, they're just bigger. And it was great. I spent 2 years helping to transition and launch Starbucks in Europe. Really enjoyed. I mean, I'll tell you, the thing I took away were my relationships with a lot of great people there who've now gotten involved with Mon.
Yeah.
But I realized as I managed through it that there was a moment when they asked me to take on a different role where I would kind of get into a succession planning, and they asked 3 people to kind of take on this rotation. One was a guy named Paul Davis, who went to become CEO of Coinstar. And the other was, oh gosh, her name just went out of my head, but she went on to become the CEO of Lululemon. I mean, just amazing people. And they'd asked me to be a part of this. And that opening led me to step back and say, what do I really want to be doing? And what I realized was managing somebody else's business was not my passion. I wanted to go back to building something. And so I went in and sat down with Howard Schultz and shared with him, listen, this has been one of the greatest experiences of my life, but I want to go build something again. And we had this fabulous, one of my most memorable conversations in my professional life, this great conversation with him about the journey and where he's going. It was a great conversation, but then we ended up leaving Starbucks and helping to launch another business called Carluccio's in the UK, where we were helping 2 entrepreneurs, Antonio and Priscilla Carluccio, who had this restaurant in London and a deli connected to it. The restaurant was called the Neal Street Restaurant. The deli was called Carluccio's, and they wanted to turn the deli into a business. So we helped them develop the business plan and then funded it. And so that kicked off an 11-year, an amazing journey where our role was very different. We helped build the management team, but we weren't running it day to day.
So you're more like consultants to the
Well,
project?
we were the largest shareholders. We came in and helped fund the business. We were very intimately involved. We were kind of like executive board members, meaning for the first 2 or 3 years we were very involved, and then we started to step back.
Did you have control at all?
I mean, technically you could say from a governance perspective we did, but the relationship was such that it was never a factor. I mean, the Carluccios were the drivers. We brought in a great management team who were world class, and then we supported them. And over an 11-year period, we built an amazing business. We took it public. It was Retail Concept of the Year 2 years in the UK. It was the public listing of the year it went public.
How big did it get?
By the time we got out, I think they had 60 or 70 locations. They were very different though. They were bigger format. It was a deli cafe, so it was a restaurant, and there was so much about it that I could go on and on about. We were in awe of the creativity and the what they'd built, and so Allie and I just loved that experience. But then we moved back to Seattle during that time, and we sat on the plane on the way back, and we said, leaving the UK at the time was tough because we had become well known in the UK, and a lot of doors were open to us, and frankly, this is the way life works. You kind of toil away in obscurity, and all of a sudden you have a success, and now you're given a lot more credit than you deserve, a lot more doors open, and that's kind of where we were. Allie was asked to host the first reality television show program in the UK.
Really? Wow.
We were moving home, so she didn't. But so there was just all these weird opportunities, and so we kind of turned our back on those things and said, we're going to go home. We want to raise our kids in Seattle.
Was that the impetus for it? I mean,
Yeah.
You wanted to just be home around family and so on?
We had 2 boys at the time. We now have 4. We knew that family was the most important thing, and we felt like the best place to raise our family was home, back in Seattle. So we picked up, moved home, and on the flight home, we looked at each other and said, this will give us an opportunity to determine whether or not we were lucky or whether or not we're any good. Can we recreate our success in the UK? Because we're going to start again. No one knows us. The only people who know us in Seattle know us from when we were in high school.
Yeah.
And so we've built a professional career in the UK. We're going to have to start from scratch.
Huge risk.
It was a challenge, but I'll tell you, it was really healthy. There were moments when we look back, moments when Allie would be caught up in driving the kids to soccer practice and helping with the PTA, whatever, and she in particular, she became the face of Seattle Coffee Company. Mm-hmm. Put it this way, 4 years after we moved back from the UK, we'd gone back to the UK pretty regularly. We were back, and we went out to a restaurant for dinner, and the woman who was like the maitre d', right 10 minutes after we sat down, came over and she was, I really apologize, but are you Allie Svenson? And so that was just like a reminder that we became well known there, and now we're back in Seattle, and now as we're shuffling around, and Allie at moments would just say, it's one thing to start again, it's humbling though.
Yeah. Did you miss it?
Listen, your ego kind of does miss the fact that you've worked hard and you want to get a little recognition for that. And so now you're back here and you're literally starting from scratch. I think it was one of the healthiest things we did.
Why?
It forced us to kind of get back and say, okay, let's get back to the substance. And can we build businesses and make an impact that justifies kind of some of the accolades that we had received in the UK? And yeah, it was humbling. But I'll tell you, I think if we would have stayed in the UK, we had gotten into kind of this flow where I don't know where we would have ended up. I don't know if we would have had the same gratification for our success because we've been able to have some success back in Seattle. I don't even know if we'd have the same humility, because I do think it was
Is that because humbling. You develop a cockiness about your success that you think you're invincible?
Possibly, yeah. And people start saying and doing things like in the UK, where I think you start to almost believe it. And when we came back to Seattle, that balloon was popped pretty quickly. And I then joined YPO. I was surrounded with like you and a lot of other very successful guys. Now in the UK, I would have fit right in. Back here, I'm like starting over again. And so it was humbling, but I think in hindsight, in a very healthy way.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't trade it for the world.
So that was like 2003?
We moved back in 2000.
Okay.
And so we've been back since then.
And then you started Sienna.
Started the Sienna Group, which was really a vehicle to say, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do. We're going to put some capital into this entity and bring in some friends, people I love working with, and we're going to start. And it was interesting. I think in hindsight it was probably a mistake, but we said, we've had 2 amazing, magical, really profound experiences in multi-unit retailing and restaurants. We're 2 for 2, huge successes. We're not going to do that anymore.
Wow, because you walked away from your expertise, huh?
And it was because, maybe naively, we said, retail's, restaurants, and multi-unit retail consumer is really fickle.
Yeah.
We're 2 for 2. If we try it a third time, we're going to screw it up. And we don't want to taint that amazing experience.
Yeah.
So we started to explore, and we're intellectually, curious, and so we explored a whole bunch of other stuff where we had very mixed success. We had some success, we had some failures.
Yeah.
And then it was only because people kept coming to us with ideas around where finally we said, somewhat reluctantly, all right, we'll look at it. And that's what led us to kind of getting pulled back into mod. It wasn't us being proactive to go look for it.
Right.
We were kind of pulled back into it, which was one of the greatest gifts that we've been given, which is realizing we actually knew what we had developed a perspective. We had developed some expertise.
Scott, I remember when you first did the presentation on mod, and I was in the room, and there's about 8 or 9 of us in the room, and I don't know if I've said it, I certainly thought it, I go, God, he's such a smart guy. Why does he want to get into this stupid pizza making business? Yeah. It's like, this is all we need is another Domino's. And I don't think I was probably very supportive of your idea, not because I don't care about you, because I do care about you, and I thought, this is ridiculous. But then you started to explain what mod was, and I think what I fell in love with was the mission and the culture of stuff. But take us through kind of the mechanical aspects of how mod is a different kind of pizza chain, and then maybe get into the cultural aspect.
Yeah, sure. So you were not the only one who, in a very polite way, said you're fucking crazy.
Yeah.
And including a guy who's now our president, who worked with us at Starbucks, named Paul Tuig, was a COO at Panera Bread, president at Dunkin' Donuts for 7 years.
And he's still your president today?
He's our president today. Yeah. Super smart guy, very experienced, and he literally said to me, this is the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Yeah. But if you're going to do it, I'll help you. Again, just because we had a good relationship.
Right.
So mod is a fast casual pizza concept. And we're the first ones. Our simple insight was, Pizza, big category, $45 billion, second largest restaurant category behind hamburgers, but it had a shocking lack of innovation. Except on the delivery side. Domino's, highly innovative company, really impressive. And Tom Douglas and what he does, highly innovative.
Yeah.
But the big fat middle of the industry, if you're going out of the home to go have pizza, not very innovative.
Mm-hmm.
And so, meanwhile, in the industry, fast casual had become very popular because it addressed the way people want to eat and the way they, the time and their expectations. Bringing really high quality product that's made just the way you want it in a really aspirational environment, great value, quickly. And so we're like, why can't that be done for pizza? No one had done it before. Mm-hmm. That was our simple insight. And so we opened one store in downtown Seattle in 2008 as a laboratory to see if we could put these pieces together. And it took us about a year to figure it out. It worked, so we opened some more, and it kind of just started to blossom. In the first 5 years, though, and people, Mod's an overnight success, 11 years in the making. The first 5 years, we opened 12 stores in Western Washington, largely Seattle. On our 10th birthday, which was last November, we had 400 stores spread across 70 markets, including the UK. So there's two chapters. One was figure it out, validate that there's something here. Second chapter was let's grow this thing.
So was that intentional? I mean, did you start out and go, the first 5 years we're going to have 10 or 11 stores and we're going to figure it out?
We didn't put a timeline on it or a number of stores, but we said we've got to figure this out and have high conviction before we grow it. If we're going to grow, we want to build a concept, if we're going to do this, that have real scale. We can build a big business.
So how do you talk to your investors, your equity partners about that, when the guys that were first in the deal? I mean, do you tell them, hey, it's going to take us a while to figure this out and don't expect anything for 5 or 7 years? Or?
Yeah, it's a great question. We actually raised quite a bit of capital, over $40 million initially, just from high net worth, people from the industry, people who got it. And it was largely around, we think there's an opportunity here. If we can validate it, the white space is significant, but we're not going to pivot to grow it until we really feel like we've got the unit economics figured out, the customer proposition, and the why.
So the return on equity is more pie in the sky, no pun intended, than I'm going to promise you an IRR of X.
Well, I think people realize that if you're going to build a business in this category, it's kind of binary. You invest initially, and it's kind of a 1 or a 0,
right?
And then as you start to develop it, that risk profile starts to shift. Mm-hmm. But in that early days, you put a little capital in, you figure out whether or not this idea you have actually resonates, and then you start to refine it. But the thing about our business is that the return on capital, if you invest $100 to open a store and you do it right, the cash on cash returns can be very, very strong, 40% plus. Now,
a lot better than most restaurants. 3 times, 3x.
Yeah. Now the reason is because if I invest $100, I want to earn $40 plus per annum back in cash flow. Is because that unit, you now need to build a lot of infrastructure around being able to grow that. You have to put a kind of a district team in place, a regional team, a central team. So to get a 20 to 25% return on equity, you need to get a 40% return on capital. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the model. And we spent a lot of time validating that and also clarifying why we wanted to do this. What was the reason?
What's it cost to open a store? What's a store cost?
$600,000 to $700,000.
And what's the revenue on a store? Is it a couple $1 million bucks or?
1.2 to 1.5.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And where will you be number of stores wise at the end of this year?
Approaching 500.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I mean, the obvious question is, what's the goal? When's the IPO? Huh?
Well, so we have. I mean, the challenge in our business is that if you're successful and you want to grow, you got to raise a lot of capital because for every store you got to invest $600,000 to $700,000, and so the faster you grow, the more capital you need, and so you have this dynamic where you become very capital consumptive. So we have raised over $340 million of equity in our life, and we've been very fortunate to attract some world-class investors who really believe in what we're doing, not just the concept, but the whole purpose behind it and
Sure.
the way in which that has led us to building a business that we think has got real sustainable competitive advantage over time. We need to take care of them. Even though the purpose for the business is to make a difference in the lives of our people and through them in our communities, we need to make sure that everybody involved with MOD is looked after, including our shareholders. So $340 million of equity, we got to figure out a way to, given our purpose and the fact that that is the primary focus, we really don't have an interest in selling the company. Unless I always joke, if the Gates Foundation came along and said, wow, we love this model, we're gonna
Mission Pizza.
right, we're gonna turn this into this, okay, they'd probably even do a better job than we would. But that's not gonna happen. So we're not gonna go sell it to somebody who doesn't have the same commitment or conviction we do to the mission. So, how do we do it? Maybe a public offering.
Yeah.
And so we've been kind of thinking about that and preparing for that eventuality for a while. But we just raised a bunch of capital, so we've got a little bit of runway before we have to make that decision.
Are you going to take another round of capital after this one?
We just closed a round of 160 million, and so that's gonna last us for quite some time.
A year, 6 months?
No, that'll last us a couple plus years. I mean, it actually should get us to the point where we largely become self-funding. So that's a tipping point for us, because we've been climbing this hill of, we built a lot of infrastructure. Because in our industry, there's a real advantage to first mover advantage. And if you're going to win, if you look at all the other fast casual concepts and categories, coffee, Starbucks, Mexican, Chipotle, sandwiches, Panera, you look at the value they've created in the category, the vast majority of the value's gone to the leading brand. If you compare Starbucks with Peet's Coffee, no comparison. If you compare Chipotle to Qdoba, no comparison. You go through it. So we determined early on, if we created the category, we want to win in the category, because that's going to give us a much bigger platform to make an impact.
And you do have some competitors in the...
We do, yeah. There was a period of time where during that first 5 years, no one entered the category for 3.5 years. Then everybody seemed to enter the category. There was not a week that went by when you didn't hear about a new fast casual pizza brand starting.
Has there been any fast casual pizzas that have gone public?
No. Well, a public company started a public restaurant company started a fast casual pizza brand.
And are you the largest in the space?
We are, but we weren't always. So even though we created the category during that first 5 years, when we only got to 12, a couple other brands came out and they started franchising. We're predominantly company owned. They started to franchise, so they got ahead of us, and we kind of methodically just kept growing. And now we are 25% bigger than the second largest, and we're accelerating in our growth beyond them.
So let's talk about the culture a little bit, because I know you hire felons and you do some incredible things from a culture, mission standpoint, and labor is such a huge concern in today's market. I know
absolutely.
we're hiring 1,000 employees in the next 18 months, and we don't know where they're going to come from. So, how have you adopted this culture to be kind of a billboard for recruiting and a success?
So it's interesting. When we started the business, unemployment was the highest it's been in our lifetime. Today, it's the lowest.
Right.
But we didn't know that was going to happen.
Right.
What we said at the time is we want to use our business as a platform to make a positive social impact. We didn't know exactly what that was, but we decided to focus on our people. So we invited a bunch of great people into the business and said, we're heading north. Our North Star is that. Help us figure it out. And through that, in the early years, a bunch of things happened, one of which was we hired a young man who was a 3-time former felon. He had an ankle bracelet on when he joined. And he ended up becoming a real role model employee. Loyal, dedicated, impactful. And that started to blossom. He brought in some of his cohort, and it just started to take on a life of its own. It was not a top-down, Allie and I saying this is what we should do. We had just simply said, we're heading north. Got a bunch of great people and said, help us figure it out. They kind of helped us bring this to life. We then watched carefully and saw, wow, these people who have barriers to employment, there's an opportunity there for us to make a difference in their lives. And what's happened is, initially it started with people transitioning out of incarceration. And it's expanded to people then transitioning out of rehab or homelessness or foster care or people with neurological or learning disabilities or anybody who would be defined as having a barrier to employment. Somebody a barrier to someone to giving them a chance. And we kind of opened our doors to them and said, listen, your past may well describe you, it doesn't need to define you. And if you show up with the right attitude and we'll give you a chance. And we're a beliefs-led business. We're not a rules or kind of operating manual-led business. And one of our beliefs is wide boulevards, high curbs. We basically came in, if you come in and say, we're heading north, you're on a boulevard heading north. If you want to head south, there's some other great companies doing that. We're going north. We have curbs. Our curbs are our beliefs. If you come to Mod and you want to go north with us and you're prepared to stay inside the curbs, we got your back. Be yourself. If you want to go down the left-hand lane or the right-hand lane or do, twirls in the middle, bring it on.
So what are the boundaries to the felons? I mean, are you going to hire a person that was in prison for murder? Or?
So it's interesting. Initially, we had a very simple philosophy, which is if you have committed a crime and you have paid your debts to society, who are we to judge that you shouldn't deserve an opportunity?
No matter what the crime.
Initially, we were blind to. We've had to tighten up a little bit just because we now employ over 9,000 people. We have an obligation to them. And we think of it this way. We want to create the type of place where if you're sending your young son or daughter off to work, that you're sending them to a place that is going to take care of them the way you would.
Right.
I've got to be careful that I don't put an 18-year-old girl next to a repeat sex offender.
Right.
So we've had to impose some constraints. But we're trying to do that very lightly because that can really quickly trend to now we're the same. But we have people that have committed all types of crimes that listen, one of the things that I've learned is, and by the way, we don't just employ former criminals or felons. That is a population. But one of the things I've realized is that having gotten to know a lot of them, if I had been born into their circumstances, I may well have ended up in the exact same situation they were in. The card is not equal for everybody.
Sure.
And sometimes just trying to survive and get by, people do stupid stuff. But it's driven by a survival mentality, which, again, when you hear their story, you're like, it's more understandable.
I'm sure you got a million success stories of these people that, whether they're an addict or a felon or out of foster care or whatever. Is there one that comes to the top of your mind that say, hey, this guy came to us and this was a story and now he's the district manager or something?
Oh yeah, I'll tell you, there are literally dozens of them. And we talk about the fact that, one, our culture travels through those stories. That has how our culture has become so strong.
And do you, today we have these things called wow stories, where we, at stand-up, we tell a wow story every time. It's a success story. Do you have something that perpetuates these?
We do, and we're trying hard to figure out a way to get those stories to travel more broadly, because that's what keeps the culture intact.
Sure, that's what keeps the tribe together, right?
It's what keeps the tribe
And it
together.
helps with recruiting as well.
And you don't need to tell people what to do, you just tell them a story, and you celebrate a story, and they're like, I get it.
Yeah, well, they identify.
They identify with it. Yeah, so we've had dozens and dozens and dozens of stories. One of the reasons why a lot of people have looked at us and said, we've been the fastest growing restaurant brand in the country for the last 4 years. They're like, how can you do that and maintain the commitment to the culture and so forth? And I believe that early on, if you bring a group of people together and they are bound together by a set of beliefs and a movement or a set of objectives that they're sharing to do something big together, they will defend the culture. And as we've grown, because the business has had such a big impact, our first impact hire was a young man named Corey, 3-time felon, and it's an amazing story. He's an incredible young man. He's still with us. He's been with us for 8 years now. But his story has inspired others. It kind of creates this ripple effect.
Right.
But he was a guy that a really sweet guy, loyal, dedicated, hardworking, but he just had the deck stacked against him. And every time he made a mistake, the challenges of getting back on was harder and harder. And we found him, he found us, and he kind of poured himself into it. We have two things. We have what we call our core beliefs, and then we have our style, what we call the Mod style. And the Mod style is defined by the 4 Gs: grit, growth, generosity, and gratitude. And there are 4 key elements of what does it mean to be Mod. if you show up and you want to be mod, here are the 4 attributes. And the journey of mod is about getting to gratitude. Mm-hmm. One of the most powerful emotions I think that exist in mankind. It's one of those things that I think we've talked about this in forum. One of my daily practices is that every morning when I'm taking a shower, at the end of my shower, I crank it to as cold as it can get. One, I just love the invigoration. But as soon as that water gets cold, I immediately, it's like, what I got to be grateful for. And I just think about it, and I prime myself for the day. And I come out of the shower, one, because of the invigoration of the cold, but also just the thought, I'm like, I'm so lucky to be able to take on today. And, yeah, there are challenges, but when you have the right mindset, challenges just become part of the journey.
Yeah.
And people like Corey showed us that by virtue of the way they showed up. They were so grateful that we gave them an opportunity and we believed in them more than they believed in themselves, that it became addictive for us. We just poured ourselves into it and we wanted more of it. And it gets back to, why do you work so hard? I'll tell you, and we use this saying or this context and Allie and I work for Corey and the thousands of other Coreys because we've seen the impact that Mod has had on his life. Yeah. And yes, if we're successful, we'll build a business that will create value for people. Monetary value. But I'll tell you, it's the non-monetary value that this is why we're doing it. Yeah. And it's the thing that keeps us coming back. And I'll tell you, it's filled our life. Mod has been a gift for us and our kids because it's made us feel just so incredibly inspired, and the lessons we've learned I've learned more from people like Corey in the last 10 years than I've learned from some of the greatest business minds around in the previous 30. About life and about what's important, and it's been incredible.
Well, my friend, I tell you, you are an inspiration. I am grateful for our friendships, and you have built a company that's really a social model of entrepreneurship for our nation, for our world. And I'm just delighted that you've spent time with us today and been on the show. And I wish you and Allie the best. And you guys, there's no telling what's in your future. You will probably surpass the greatest companies in the world, not only financially, but with the mission you have. So I'm thankful for you.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for joining me.
It's a great pleasure just to hang out with you for a little while.
Thanks, bud.
Thanks, bud.
All right, take care. That's it. It's a wrap. Hi, this is Dwayne J. Clark from Walk This Way, your favorite business podcast. Some great advice for you entrepreneurs, whether you're a young entrepreneur, old entrepreneur, a savvy entrepreneur. I'm always going to bring you something to think about. So I'm so glad you just listened to the Scott Svenson podcast. Now, Scott is the founder of Mod Pizza. He was the founder of Seattle's Best Coffee, along with his wife, Allie. Now, 3 things I want you to take from this podcast that you just had. First of all, Allie and Scott are a tremendous team, husband and wife team. That is something I've not been able to perfect. But the thing with Allie and Scott is they know their lanes. They know what they're good at. They stay in their lanes, and if they drift over into each other's lanes, they tell each other. Really, really, really important. I'll tell you a personal story. My wife T and I decided, after traveling to over 600 spas around the world, that we were going to build our own spa. Now, we wanted to incorporate some of the best features like biophilia. We wanted to have the longest reflexology path in the country. We wanted to build a 60-foot high waterfall inside. We wanted to have wine bathing. We wanted to do all these cool things. The problem that we had is we couldn't stay in our lanes, And what I am so used to is being the CEO that's in control, that I would drift over into my wife's lane constantly and kind of smash her ideas and her voice in our company. We built out all these things. We spent a lot of money, and it was probably the worst experience, not only business experience that I've ever had, but personal experience that I had, because I could not let go of the control that I was used to having as the CEO and chairman of a company, especially with my wife. I think I could probably do it easier with employees than I could my own wife. But I'd say, oh no, I can do that. I can do that. Here's the other mistake I made. I thought, well, this spa, it's going to make a little bit of money. It's going to be about 1% of my portfolio. And I thought, well, if it's 1% of my portfolio, it doesn't deserve more than 3% of my time. That was a critical mistake. Because what I found out was any new business that you start, any new business that you build deserves 120% of your time, not 3%. Well, you know the story. You know what happened. I wanted to stay married. I wanted to make my wife happier. She was working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. I wasn't appreciated that. The business floundered, and eventually we got rid of it. Now, we lost a great deal of money in the 7 figures, but it was a great lesson for us in terms of what we needed to do and how our happiness as individuals were. And we realized, unlike Scott and Allie, who've done a phenomenal job of building Seattle's best coffee and then selling it to Starbucks, and then now has built out Mod Pizza and done an incredible job, and Mod Pizza is now taking off like a rocket. I think you guys heard in the interview when Scott told me he wanted these fast pizzas. I said, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. You know, maybe my advice is not that good. So anyway, now Mod Pizza is almost 500 stores. They're taking over the world in terms of locations of Mod Pizza. It's phenomenal, and they have a social mission. You know, one of the things they do is hire a lot of ex-prisoners to be their workforce. They've given these people a new life, a new passion. They've created a family for these people. That's incredible. These guys, Scott and Allie Svenson, are brilliant people, and they run a brilliant company. So 3 things, again, I want to leave you with. If you work with a spouse, make sure you define your lanes and you tell the person, I'm going to let you know when you start crowding me in my lane, when you come over my lane. That's the first thing I want you to know. The other thing is that you have to be a little bit audacious in terms of your goals. Seattle Coffee Company, think about this. This is a coffee company that was serving coffee in a country that drank almost total tea. That's an audacious goal. Hey, we're going to convert everyone from your 2,000 years of drinking tea to now you're going to drink coffee. So you got to be a little bit audacious. And the last thing is, when someone like me tells you it's a stupid idea, yeah, you're going to have a lot of people that tell you that's a stupid idea. Don't give up in your dreams. If you give up when the first or second or third or 10th person tells you it's a dumb idea and you collapse, well, you don't have the perseverance to make it work. So Scott and Allie obviously have the perseverance. They've obviously done this multiple times. Incredible humanitarians, incredible business people, smart people. So those are my 3 points from this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for next week. Even more smarter, greater advice coming your way. You'll be happier, your business will be better, your life will be better. If you like what you've heard, subscribe to Walk This Way. I'm Dwayne J. Clark. I'll see you next week. Please ping me.